And then there's property taxes, which can be very arbitrary. And also the wealthy, they oftentimes have an advantage because they can afford lawyers to litigate the valuation of properties and so forth. And it's hurting just the hardworking middle-class folks and the poor folks most of all because they can't, and they just have to pay it. And there have been people in our community who've had to sell their houses because they could not afford to pay the property taxes anymore.
This is the Think Brazos Podcast, and today we are joined by Mr. Rick Davis, who is running for the State House District 14, state of Texas, and for the primary election for the Republican Party. So thank you so much, Mr. Davis, for coming on the podcast.
Well, appreciate you having me.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Let's hear first a little bit about you. In just a couple of minutes, can we hear about your background and anything else you want to talk about yourself and why you're running?
Sure. Well, I grew up in the Houston area.
Okay.
I went to Texas A&M. My wife grew up in the Richardson area. She also went to Texas A&M. And we both graduated in May of 1986. My ring says 85 because I was in the Corps of Cadets. And if you're in the Corps, you typically identify with your fish class. And so because I was studying engineering, I tell people I squeezed 4 years into 5. I took 5 years to graduate. But I did take a lot of extra classes because I wanted just the full experience of college. I thought, I didn't view education as just a means to an end, but an end in itself. So I took a lot of things that were outside of my major just to learn more. I really like learning. So, in fact, I think I graduated with 195 hours. Nowadays, people would be penalized for doing that. I don't agree with that idea because if they're actually seeking to learn, I just think that they ought to be able to do that. Anyway, my wife and I met our last year at A&M. We both waited tables together at a restaurant called Chinari's. So, and Chinari's has been here. It was here for a long time, but they shut down just about 3 or 4 years ago. We missed it. It had some great Italian food. So anyway, after we graduated, we got married, and then because I took a guaranteed reserve forces duty contract with the Army, It meant that I had to serve either 8 years or in the National Guard, the Texas Army National Guard, or 8 years in the Army Reserves. So I had to be qualified as an officer. You have to go through the same training that a regular Army officer does. So I first went to Fort Benning, Georgia, and I completed the officer basic course there. Our oldest son was born actually at Martin Army Hospital. So he is now, that would have been back in 87. So he's now 34. Am I counting right? So anyway, it's been a while back. Anyway, so after I completed the officer basic course, I got into the Texas Army National Guard. I served in the 49th Armored Division for over 10 years. Really enjoyed that. I branch transferred from infantry to armor and became an armor officer. So I was an M1 tank commander.
Oh, nice.
And I served in various positions in the Army National Guard. I was a platoon leader. A few different occasions, I was a company executive officer. I became a company executive officer of the headquarters company, and served in some staff positions with battalion staff. And then ultimately, I was a company commander. So really enjoyed that. I enjoyed my time in the Texas Army National Guard. I consider my time in the military to be somewhat humble. I was ready to be mobilized, but I never was mobilized. This was back before 9/11. Okay. We came really close to being mobilized in 1991 when Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait, and they had Operation Desert Shield. And then that was it turned into Operation Desert Storm. We came very close to being mobilized, but I remember General Norman Schwarzkopf and just all the allies pulled together, and it was just spectacular how quickly that operation was conducted. But the ground war ended so quickly that we were told to stand down. So I'm proud to have served and was ready to serve, but I know that there's a lot of folks that went through a lot more than I did, and especially serving overseas. So, but I completed the officer basic course in March of '87. And then I got a dream job. I worked down at NASA in the Johnson Space Center. And initially I worked for Rockwell Shuttle Operations Company. It was a wholly owned subsidiary of Rockwell International. And then I worked in payload operations. And when I was a kid, I used to want to be an astronaut. Never did get to become an astronaut, but I at least got to meet a whole bunch of them. And I got to work with them and work with a lot of engineers in the space program. I did that for about 2 years. And then I decided I wanted to get into like design work and so forth. So then I went to work for McDonnell Douglas Space Systems Company, and I worked in the space station program. I was still at the Johnson Space Center, and we still lived in the same community. But I just wanted to try that out. Well, interestingly, through an unusual sequence of events, I also had a friend that persuaded me to sit for the LSAT while I was there, and he was wanting to go to law school. He pointed out to me that you can actually go part-time, either U of H or South Texas College of Law. It just takes longer because you're getting the same professors, the same textbooks, and everything. You just go at night instead of doing it 3 years during the day and taking off in the summers. And you also if you're doing it part-time, you also go to class in the summers. So I did that, and at first it was very interesting in the sense that I was just intrigued. I really liked learning about our government, how the law worked, and about the Constitution. I especially liked constitutional law. So at first I thought, well, I'll keep pursuing this, and I might go into like engineering management, because some people get law degrees and they don't necessarily practice. But the more that I did it, the more I realized I wanted to practice.
Okay. And
so I wanted to be in the courtroom. I like persuasion. I like the art of persuasion and so forth. So at the same time, my wife and I, when we started law school, we had one son who was just a little toddler, and by the time we finished law school, we had 4. So we had lots of kids early on. And then, by the way, after having our 4th son, then we had a gap of about 5 years. Our daughter was born in 97, and then our youngest son was born in 99. So we've got a total of 6 kids. While going through that process, working at the Space Center, the Johnson Space Center, and doing engineering and going to law school at night, we also started to figure out, well, where do we want to end up? And we kind of wanted to get out of the Houston rat race. And so if you've ever seen the movie Jerry Maguire, where he writes on a napkin, fewer clients, less money, we kind of had that kind of experience where I thought, let's get to a better place to live and raise a family. And so even if I didn't make as much money, so that became our plan. And I even sent a resume to a law firm in El Campo, Texas, of all places. So we were interested in getting into a mid-sized town and so forth. Well, I was interviewed by a couple of firms here in Brazos County, and then lo and behold, I had a second interview with one of them, and then I got a job offer, and I started working for them. I worked for Davis & Davis. It's a very prominent law firm. It was a father-son team that started the firm, and really smart lawyers, a lot of integrity. I really enjoyed working there. And it was kind of fun. I'm not related to them, but at least people thought I was somebody important when I answered the phone. Yeah. So they would think that Fred was my dad, and I thought Fred got a little irritated about that because he's probably only like 12 years older than I am. But anyway, I really enjoyed it. I learned a whole lot from those fellows, from those guys. They're excellent lawyers. And but I started to do an area of law that I didn't expect to want to do, and that was criminal law. And I actually thought I would be a prosecutor. I got a second interview with the Brazos County DA's office when I was in law school, and actually I applied at the Harris County DA's office also. So, which was kind of contrary to what we're wanting to do about getting out of the big city, but I thought I wanted to be the prosecutor. But I realized that it's a very important role also. Not everybody who's charged is guilty, and even if they are guilty, they're entitled to a fair trial and a vigorous defense. I've often said that the prosecutors, they enforce the Texas Penal Code and other statutes, and on the defense side, we're enforcing the Constitution. Yeah. So we're making them do their job right, and we're making the police do their job right. So, and I also like to do family law. I like helping people because those are difficult circumstances. My parents were divorced, and I know what it was like to be a kid in the divorce, and it can be hard on kids, really hard on kids. So I was wanting to do more and more areas of law that the firm, they're more interested in civil litigation and personal injury law, which I have nothing against those. But so, in 1995, I decided to start my own practice. I parted on good terms. I still consider them to be friends. And anyway, so I did that. And then I'm also civic-minded. I've been civic-minded since I was in college. In 1998, I decided to run for, actually I announced in 97, but I decided to run for County Court Law number 2 in 1998. I won my primary without a runoff. The incumbent, she'd actually taken a job in California, so she decided to pull out of the race. I was unopposed in November of 98. And then I took office in County Court Law number 2, January 1st of 1999. And I was really wanting to move a lot of cases because there was a pretty significant backlog in that court. It took a long time for cases to get to trial. Oh, okay. So I knew the court coordinator, and I actually met with him before I even took office. His name was Tommy Munoz. He later went on to become a justice of the peace here in Brazos County. But I met with Tommy, and he's former military too. He's retired Air Force, and he used to work at the Trigon at the. So we had a lot in common. We got along well, and I told him, I said, look, Tommy, I want to go and set some cases for trial. So my first day on the job, we actually picked a jury. We tried a jury trial. We actually picked another one 2 days later. We picked another one the following Monday, and so forth. So we moved a whole lot of cases back then, and we cleared the backlog pretty quickly. In fact, before the end of the year, I think within 10 months, we'd gone from 1,077 criminal cases down to 377. So we were moving cases pretty quickly, and justice delayed is justice denied. So we needed to give people their day in court. It's a court of general jurisdiction, so I also preside over probate matters, family law cases. It has family law jurisdiction, and also civil litigation, civil cases, if the amount of controversy was less than $100,000. If it was a larger case, it would have to be in district court. So after doing that for a while, I had some lawyers on both sides of the aisle, or the docket, encourage me, said, you might want to consider running for the 272nd District Court. So, because that was up in 2000, and I decided to run for that. I had a primary opponent and won the primary, and I was unopposed in November. So then took office in the district court on January 1st of 2001. And I ran for reelection in 2004, and then was reelected. And then, so I served a total of about 8 years as a judge. Okay. Because I didn't finish the first term in county court law, I'd actually run for the district bench. In 2008, I decided to run for district attorney because, like I said, I'm very interested in government and how it works, and I thought I could, bring some good things to the office and management and so forth. And didn't win, but I've been in private practice ever since, and I've really enjoyed it. But I still have this calling to serve the public, and in fact, I've wanted to serve in the state legislature since I was in college.
Have you run?
Had a run before.
Have you ever run before for state?
Actually, in 2010, okay. Fred Brown was the incumbent, and he was he'd given some indication that he might be moving.
Okay.
And so and then Buddy Wynn, our former retired, he's now passed away. He was a longtime Democrat. He was our tax assessor and collector. He decided to run for the spot, District 14. And then Fred Brown decided to run after all, but I'd already announced. And so then it was a 4-candidate race because Blanche Brick, who became a city councilwoman in College Station, she was also running. So it was a 4-candidate race, but it's pretty hard to beat an incumbent because they've got a lot of people that they've seen him work and so forth. And a lot of people supporting him. Mm-hmm. So I ran in 2010 and it was unsuccessful. Fred Brown got reelected. And then in 2018, I decided to run, and Mr. Raney was the incumbent, and I didn't win that race. But since he's decided to retire, I thought, well, maybe now is the time.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Well, let's get into some issues that we wanted to talk to you about today. I know, judging from some past conversations, I've heard you speak a lot about property taxes. This podcast, we're interested in things like housing affordability. How can you make someone's living place more affordable? And so I want to hear a little bit about your ideas for property taxes.
Okay. Well, I have a strong disdain for property taxes because I think in many situations they're unfair, they're arbitrary, and they're really hard on folks who have a hard time affording them. And especially people want to move to Texas. It's a great place to live. Last time I checked, I think the population of Texas has been increasing by about 1,000 people a day.
That's correct.
It is. If you add it up, that's like a million new people every 3 years.
Right.
And especially now, a lot of folks are coming from California, and I've heard of stories of Californians coming in buying property sight unseen. Mm-hmm. And what's that doing? And a lot of them, because their property is so expensive, they've got these huge windfalls. They'll sell property they might have had for 20 years, and they've got a huge amount of money, and they're able to pay a lot more. They're driving up the price of land. Right. My wife and I have a small place that we like to get away to in Edwards County. Okay. And we got it about a little over, maybe 2.5 years ago, and I think it's already increased in value by 40 or 50% in just a couple of years. And so, but that also affects people here in these towns, in like Bryan and College Station, because there's folks that they might be approaching retirement age, they might have been in a house for a long time, but all of a sudden the appraiser says, well, your house has it's really valuable now, so you're gonna, even if the authorities don't increase the tax rate, the valuation increases how much they have to pay in taxes.
Right.
Now, this past year, my wife and I paid 1.5% of our home's value towards property taxes. So I would like to pursue a path to actually eliminate property taxes because it's going to be difficult. I know it's going to be difficult because schools have to be properly funded. county governments have to be properly funded, and cities, they get a sliver of their revenue from property taxes as well. So we've got to find alternative ways of doing that. But if you think about it, there's functionally 3 types of taxes. There's an income tax, don't want that. In fact, there's a constitutional amendment preventing us from having that in Texas, so that's not going to happen. And then there's property taxes, which can be very arbitrary, and also the wealthy, they oftentimes have an advantage because they can afford lawyers to litigate the valuation of properties and so forth. Right. And it's hurting just the hardworking middle class folks and the poor folks most of all because they can't, and they just have to pay it. And there have been people in our community who've had to sell their houses because they could not afford to pay the property taxes anymore.
That's correct.
So I would like to find alternative sources of revenue to fund the schools, the counties, and that sliver that goes to the cities.
Like what?
Well, we pay 20 cents a gallon on all of our fuel. Okay, a gallon of gasoline has a 20-cent state tax on it. The gallon of diesel has a 20-cent state tax on it. Okay, it's going to require a lot of math. Okay, it wouldn't surprise me if a bill to do this was 500 pages long, because it's going to have to come from several different sources. Now, we don't have sales tax on the sale of real estate, but let's say we had, for example, a 1.5% sales tax. Well, that's how much I paid in property taxes just for 1 year. If I had the choice, even if it was 2.5%, even 3%, if I could pay a 3% sales tax on a home that I bought and I never had to pay property taxes, I would jump on top of that. Now, it's almost assuredly we'd also have to have a small increase in sales tax, and people talk, well, that hits the poor and so forth. But if John Doe or Susie Mendez or anybody, if anybody's paying, let's say $500 a month in property tax out of their mortgage payment, because most mortgage companies require that we escrow our property tax payments and also the insurance. So if their mortgage payment if they're paying $500 a month, and their mortgage payment goes down $500 a month because they're not having to pay the property taxes, well, then they're going to have more to pay, like let's say 1.5% more in sales tax. I know it's not going to be easy. And but I think it's worth doing because it is the consumption tax. I mean, you've got income tax, which we don't want. We got property tax, which we have, and it's cumbersome and complicated and unfair. And then you got consumption tax. You never hear about lawsuits about somebody suing somebody over, well, I had to pay 20 cents a gallon on gasoline. Okay, right. It's so fair to everyone, and so that's what I favor. And it will also encourage savings and encourage people to develop and just keep just developing their homes and improving their homes and so forth. So now, what's the fallback position? Well, I don't want to have a fallback position going into it, but I know that it might actually take, to eliminate property taxes, it might take a few years, maybe a few terms, maybe longer.
Step down.
Yeah, maybe longer.
Yeah.
The problem that we have is if we increase taxes somewhere over here on one side, and we're trying to eliminate property taxes here, the problem is, well, what happens if you can't get the other one eliminated? Then you got two taxes. Because the government, it's almost never the case where there's a temporary tax. Now, I will say this, though. If you go on the state comptroller's website, there's actually a very good segment or a page that talks about the long history of property taxes in Texas. And they even point out that up until 1982, we had a state property tax, and then that was abolished. So if we can reform...
State property tax?
Yes.
Okay.
If it's on their website. Now, that's where I got that from.
Okay.
The comptroller's website. So if you look, I mean, if the whole state of Texas can revise its budget and how it pays for essential governmental services, if the whole state can do it, then I think that we can do it also for the schools and the counties and the cities.
Oh, okay. Got it.
So anyway, getting back to the other thing, as far as like, if that can't be done, I still would like to seek property tax relief in another way. And one way, I mean, if you increase the homestead exemption significantly, a lot of people would end up not having to pay property taxes at all.
Really?
Well,
Okay.
I mean, let's just, I haven't done the math yet. Okay, I'm pretty good with math, but I haven't done this math. But let's say the homestead exemption was up to $450,000.
Oh, yeah.
The average home in Texas is about $447,000 last time I checked. So if your home was that much or less, well, then you wouldn't be paying property taxes.
Okay, so basically taking it from the $100,000 that currently exists after the last legislature and significantly going up.
Well, that would certainly help the working folks, the middle class folks, and also the people who are struggling more, and the poorer folks.
Okay, and another area that we deal with Habitat for Humanity, like any other builder, is the cost of regulation. So there have been some studies recently that say that close to a quarter of a home's sticker price is regulation at the local, state, and federal level. Have you given any thought to attacking regulations, if you're elected, as a means to try and get that price point as affordable as possible for families looking for an affordable home?
Well, yes, I favor minimal regulation. My view of government is that government should provide essential services and some things that the private sector cannot provide. And it should provide some regulation to just ensure an orderly society and to just to protect people from dishonest practices and so forth and so on. For example, there's regulations as to how we install septic systems. You know, if you're out in an area or in a county where you're outside any city limits and there's no regulations governing a septic system, and the builder only puts one septic tank in or doesn't do it properly, you're not going to see that. You're not going to see that. You know, you're just going to see the ground after the house has been made ready and so forth. So there are times when some regulation is appropriate just to protect consumers from unethical builders and or other contractors that might not do things the right way, or they might create something that's unsafe. You know, for example, I mean, I know that there's houses in certain parts of College Station when they were built in the 70s, they have very thin slabs and they have all kinds of foundation problems. And you can't see that when you buy the house. So I'm not saying I'm against all regulation, because I think there's some that's sensible and that is beneficial and helpful, but I sure don't like bureaucracy, and I don't like just endless red tape, and I would like to eliminate that to the extent that I could.
And kind of related to that, there's a lot of at state level politics, there's a lot of what I've noticed is that representatives, they're either for a certain amount of preemption of local government, or they're not. They're for local control totally. Where do you stand on that in terms of when you're making laws, regulations, things like that? Do you say local, do your own thing, or that there is a certain amount of, I mean, you mentioned regulating safety.
Right.
Like that.
Well, that's a very broad question.
I know.
And we could talk about that for hours, probably over several days. But I think that there's some that's appropriate, some straight state preemption, but I think it should be limited as much as possible. I think that government should do as much as is necessary and no more. So I mean, the government shouldn't be in the business of making profit and so forth and so on. We should plan for the future, and we should prepare. But I favor local control as much as possible, because the people who in a certain locale they're going to better know what the needs are.
Sure.
I mean, like, for example, you know, Brazos County. I love living here. My wife and I, we've raised our family here. We love living here. But the situations here are very different from how they are down in when we lived in Friendswood, Texas. And then the soil's different, for example. On the other hand, I love to go up to East Texas and go deer hunting. Well, Palestine, Texas is different from Brazos County, Texas. And so in Real County, let's say Leakey, that's the county seat of Real County. Well, that's very different. Right. Okay. So I favor local control in that sense, because the local people will best know what needs to be done.
Okay, got it. Well, in the just couple of minutes we have left, is there anything that we missed that you want to talk about? Again, we just have a couple of minutes, but is there anything we missed?
Well, there's several things that are important to me, but I'm trying to think what's most of greatest concern to your listeners. I favor border security. I think, if Californians want to move here, or people from Oregon want to move here, well, it's a free country. They have the right to move here. But I also see a problem with the influx of population coming in that are not lawful. And let me hasten to add, I'm not against immigration. Sure. I favor legal immigration. Okay, if you think about it, unless we're Native Americans, all of us are descended from an immigrant if we're not an immigrant right now. my mother-in-law did my genealogy for me, and we can trace back where we came from and who arrived where and so forth from England. But so I'm not against immigration, but right now they're not vetting people. Okay, there are people that are coming in here that I think hate us, and that is a big concern of mine. So I want us to be more secure in that sense. I'm also concerned about how reckless our federal government is with the spending of money. And a lot of folks don't understand, if you have a fiat currency and inflation by definition is the increase in currency. And whenever they keep printing more dollars, you have more dollars chasing goods, but it just drives the price of everything up. And I'm very concerned about that. I know there's a movement in the last session to try and create some sort of Texas bullion-based currency. I'm not exactly sure the best solution for that, but I think that Texas needs to prepare for the future, and so that we can lessen the effects of some of the damage that's being done to the whole country in Washington.
Wow.
So, but there's some other issues that are very important to me, but I think those were probably the most. I don't know how much time we have left, but there's. I think that would be, for your audience, I think that would be some of the most important ones.
Perfect. Well, we're about out of time, but before we go, can you give, for our listeners who might want to get in touch with you, learn more about your campaign, or even help, where can they go? Well,
thank you for asking. They can go to our website. That's the easiest way, electrickdavis.com, one word. And it's not electric, like getting the charge out of it.
That's kind of what I thought.
You got to put a K in there. So it's electrickdavis.com. And you can just send us an email, and if you want to help us out, put up a yard sign or just help us block walking or whatever, that would be a great way to do it.
Well, perfect. Well, Rick, we really appreciate you coming on the Think Brazos podcast. Again, this has been Rick Davis, running for the 14th State House District. And thanks again.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks.